Hello and welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Julia Kim. In this week's show, we'll take a look at how the region is being affected by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Turkey is forced to take sides as two of its major partners go to war. Ankara announcing it's limiting a key route for Russian warships by sealing the Bosphorus and Dardanelles straits. We'll speak to the EU's former ambassador to Turkey shortly. Well, as the war in Ukraine sparks fears of a global energy shortage, we'll take a look at the economic ties between the oil-producing Gulf nations and Russia with France 24's business editor Kate Moody. Now, for years, NATO member Turkey has enjoyed strong economic and political relations with its two Black Sea neighbours. But that could change now that Turkey has decided to seal the Bosphorus and Dardanelles straits. The move, requested by Ukraine, limits the movement of Russian warships. Under the 1936 Montreux Convention, Ankara has the right to limit transit through its straits during wartime. But it had resisted doing so until Sunday, when it finally officially recognized Russia's invasion of Ukraine as a war.
Geçici bir iki havadan saldırı değil, resmen savaş hali var şu anda.
A declaration from Ankara limiting access to the Dardanelles Strait for Russian and Ukrainian warships. Under the 1936 Montreux Convention, Turkey has control over the Dardanelles and Bosphorus Straits connecting the Mediterranean and Black Seas, and can limit the passage of warships in the event of war. Ukraine has been asking Turkey to apply this measure since Russia's invasion began. Its implementation comes as further proof that Ankara has chosen its side in the conflict. Though less than a month ago, even as Russian troops were already massed at Ukraine's borders, the Turkish president took a more neutral position on a visit to Kiev, offering to host a summit between the leaders of the two countries.
Turkey is prepared to undertake its part in order to end the crisis between two friendly nations that are its neighbours in the Black Sea.
On the same day, while signing a free trade treaty, Turkey committed to supplying attack drones to Ukraine. Bayraktar TB2 drones used by the Ukrainian army against Russian armoured vehicles, as seen in these videos. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, though diplomatically closer to Russia in recent years, went on to firmly condemn its invasion of Ukraine.
We find the military operation launched early this morning against Ukraine's territory unacceptable, and we reject it.
From then on, Turkey has been defending Ukrainian sovereignty, despite abstaining from the Council of Europe vote sanctioning Moscow. In spite of conflicting relations with the West, particularly on the migration issue and the Syrian conflict, Turkey, a NATO member since 1952, is now pushing its allies to show firmness towards Russia.
The West, which has given plenty of advice on this issue, continues to do so. I hope that today's NATO summit will take a more determined stance.
Demonstrators are turning out almost daily to show support for Ukrainians here in Ankara and Istanbul. Meanwhile, Turkey continues to repatriate its nationals from Ukraine. All while fearing the economic consequences of its position, Turkey is highly dependent on Russian energy resources, which make up 20% of its imports in oil and a third in gas.
Well, joining us on the programme is Mark Pierini, former EU ambassador to Turkey. Now, we know that Turkey has a very delicate balancing act to perform. How is it going to appease both countries, especially given the fact that it's in the midst of a severe economic crisis? It needs to maintain good relations with both Ukraine and Russia.
Well, Turkey has so far pursued a strict policy of balancing. It has condemned the Russian operation. It has mentioned or repeated its support to Ukraine's independence and sovereignty, and it has avoided following Western Europe and US sanctions against Russia. So essentially, a balancing act, which may, under certain circumstances, become a high-wire act because of the possibility of Russian retaliation.
If Russia does decide to retaliate against Turkey for invoking the Montreux Convention, how will this affect Turkey?
Well, Russia has really two reasons to retaliate eventually. One is the straits, as you mentioned. The other is that Turkey has sold armed drones to Ukraine, the now famous Bayraktar TB2, which are proving to be very useful to the Ukrainian forces. So there are two reasons. In fact, retaliate in several ways. One is a military operation in northwestern Syria, Idlib province, where Turkey has troops. That would be extremely complicated for Turkey because of the presence of more than 1.5 million internally displaced Syrians. And the other is, of course, supply of gas through the Turkish Stream pipeline, or trade relations and tourism relations, which are very important for Turkey.
And let's talk about Turkey's relationship with Ukraine. Now that it's given Kiev what it's asked for, how will the relationship between those two countries change?
Well, Ukraine is, of course, very satisfied with the sale of Turkish drones. They have proven their efficiency in other circumstances, as we know, in Syria, in Libya, in Nagorno-Karabakh. So there are some of the most advanced weapons of this type in the world. The problem is that it is probable that the current inventory of such drones in the Ukraine army is only around 2024. So very quickly, if the conflict lasts, they will need resupply, they will need ammunition, they will need spare parts, and that will, of course, become increasingly difficult. On the longer term, what you have is that Ukraine is, of course, a supplier to Turkey for tourism, for commodities like wheat and so on. But more importantly, Turkey is counting on an agreement with Ukraine on aerospace industry. Of course, that is only a post-war operation, but that will be important for Turkey and for Ukraine. So they have a kind of a mutually dependent relationship.
Now, Turkey, it seems, on the face of it, has taken sides. It's chosen Ukraine over Russia. Do you think that Russia will retaliate against Turkey?
Well, at this point, there is nothing much new in Turkey's position, because Turkey, as we know, has rejected the annexation of Crimea in 2014 and has said so consistently. So the fact that they are now supporting again the independence and sovereignty of Ukraine is not a novelty for Russia. What would be a novelty would be a constant influx of armed drones to the Ukrainian forces, assuming this is physically feasible, which is another question, and that would trigger a retaliation from Russia. The issue of the straits is extremely complicated because, as you've said, the convention, the Montreux Convention, is from 1936. Different world, different participants, very convoluted language, can be interpreted one way or the other. So that will remain a bone of contention, but not necessarily the trigger of retaliation.
Okay, Marc Pierini, thank you very much for sharing your analysis with us. That was Marc Pierini, former EU ambassador to Turkey. Now, Gulf states have remained largely silent in the face of Russia's assault on Ukraine. Their neutrality, a reflection of their deepening geopolitical and economic ties with Russia. Well, joining me now is France 24's business editor, Kate Moody. Kate, one of, if not the major areas of overlapping interest is the energy sector, and in particular, oil production.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia and Russia are the two major players and biggest producers of OPEC+. That's the group of oil-producing countries that have been coordinating their output in an effort to regulate global supplies and prices. Now, they've been very cautious about increasing supplies in recent months, despite soaring demand and soaring prices. And that's partly because they stand to benefit, right? Because companies and countries that sell oil earn more money when prices are high. Now, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has prompted still more concerns about global energy supplies. The spiraling conflict and ensuing sanctions could potentially interrupt shipments of oil and natural gas. And on the day of the Russian invasion, we did see the price of Brent crude soaring over $100 per barrel for the first time since 2014. Now, it has been suggested that other countries like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and other OPEC members could help to fill that potential shortfall. But Riyadh in particular has really been resisting that pressure to pump more. It says it remains committed to the stance that's taken by OPEC+. Some analysts see that as a sign, if not of tacit support for Moscow, then at least a sign that it's going to try to stay in a fairly neutral stance, at least for now.
And what about broader trade between Russia and Middle Eastern countries?
Well, Turkey is the only major trading partner in the region for Russia. It accounts for about 5% of overall Russian exports. The rest of the Middle East and North Africa together account for another 5%, and that's mostly fuel and consumer goods. Now, having said that, trade between Russia and the Gulf states has nearly doubled in 5 years, from about $3 billion in 2016 to more than $5 billion last year. That's mostly with the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. There's also a growing arms trade in the region. Sales to the Middle East have accounted for about a third of overall Russian arms exports in recent years. Algeria, Egypt, and Iraq are the biggest customers there. Last year, Saudi Arabia and Russia signed a military cooperation agreement, and Moscow has played a really decisive role in some of the regional conflicts, including Syria and Libya. Now, some other areas to keep an eye on throughout this conflict. Tourism could be affected throughout the Middle East region. Dubai, in particular, is a real hotspot for the Russian elite, both for vacations and for investment. And beyond the Gulf, Russia and Ukraine are both major producers of wheat, corn, and sunflower oil. And among their top importers of those products are countries like Egypt, Turkey, Lebanon, and Yemen. Now, agriculture isn't a huge part of Russia's economy, but it's clear that this conflict could have really major repercussions for economies that do rely on it for basic food supplies.
Okay, Kate Moody, France 24's business editor, thank you very much for breaking that down for us. Now, Israeli students who fled from Ukraine have landed back home after a grueling journey. This was the scene at Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. Parents and families are clearly relieved and overjoyed to be reunited with their children. This flight from Romania carried some 150 Israeli Arab students. According to the Foreign Ministry, at least 4,000 Israelis have fled Ukraine, but thousands more remain. Israel has stationed representatives at border crossings with Poland, Hungary, and Romania to help evacuate its citizens and Jews. Well, that's it for this edition of Middle East Matters. Thanks very much for watching. There's more news coming up here on France 24.